This is Rick Green with today's Constitutional Minute. Oh, friends, let me just be really blunt with you today. I'm struggling. I am grieving. I am confused. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm sure many of you feeling the same thing. I'm in shock at the decimation of our Constitution. The Bill of Rights is quite literally in shambles from the overwhelming display of government power, putting almost an entire nation on house arrest, to the thug-like tactics and intimidation of mayors and governors against churches, whether those churches are black or white, Romanian, Protestant, or Catholic. And then, of course, the absolutely evil violation of George Floyd's Fourth Amendment rights, with a completely, obviously unjustified seizure of literally his life. And then the gross negligence of the Louisville Police Department's use of no-knock warrants that resulted in the death of Breonna Taylor. There's so many stories we could talk about. There's so many things happening so fast. So I'm just going to ask you up front here, please forgive me if I ramble a bit today. I'm trying to make sense of all this, at least of some of these things. And I'm just going to tell you, if you're looking for quick sound bites or you're wanting platitudes, you've come to the wrong place. My hope is to start actually an extended conversation that will allow us to actually work towards real change, not just symbolism. So I'm thinking the analogy I'm thinking of is just like when you're in a storm. And things are, crazy all around you. The chaos is literally blowing you from one end to the other, and you're looking for something solid to hold on to, something that's grounded, that's unchanging, that's unmoving. Even in the midst of a terrible storm, it's that solid. I think in the same way, when the storms of life have created such chaos that we are disoriented, we're literally looking about for something solid. We're looking for something that is unchanging and true. And truth is what it's about. Truths. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. Doesn't it feel like we're grasping about in the dark? We're trying to find truth right now. Is it possible that the reason it's so hard to find truth is because we've rejected it for so long? I think probably the most well-known, most famous line from the founding documents of America is right there in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Without that line, without truths, then it doesn't matter if you talk about rights and you talk about everyone being created equal and all those things. If you don't have truth, if you don't have moral absolutes, then the rest of the Declaration and the Constitution, they're nothing more than suggestions. The idea that all men are treated equally under the law, the idea that inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, that those things don't work if we don't start with truth. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm hoping I can start us just on some common ground truths that I think we can all agree on. Let me just give you a couple of them. First one is that the nature of man is sinful. We're prone to do wrong. It includes every single one of us. None of us get out of this. Red, white, yellow, black, or brown. We may be precious in His sight, but it's not because of our innate goodness. It's actually in spite of our innate badness, if I can use that word. That truth means that every single one of us is capable, in fact, guilty of sin and evil. That includes the cops and the robbers. It includes the plumbers and the electricians, the talking heads on social media. It includes you, and it includes me. So that's truth number one. Look, man is sinful and prone to do wrong. So if that's true, then we need a spiritual Savior to change our hearts and our nature and our actions. That's true. That's a whole nother topic. But we also need, here on this earth, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our country, we need laws and law enforcement to restrain evil and protect the innocent as best as possible. In fact, if you keep going in the Declaration, that's the very purpose of government, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I think we can all agree on that. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that it was actually a Democrat, Bill Clinton, it was his initiative at the request of black community leaders to add 70,000 police officers to the streets to do exactly that, to restrain evil and protect the innocent. And it worked. It genuinely helped. It led to a massive increase in prison population, but it led to an 80% drop in crime in the big cities. Now, historically, we've known that as justice. Justice allows for liberty and freedom to flourish. So truth one, we're all sinners and we need restraint. Truth two, that is a proper role of government to do exactly that. Now, truth number three is pretty simple. No system's perfect. Like, every profession has bad actors. We should keep working hard to have a more perfect union. And because even good people make mistakes and bad people do find their way into positions of power, that means we got to have a very robust, multi-layered system of due process. That way, it's going to make sure, or the goal at least, is to make sure that every person, regardless of faith, color, neighborhood, wealth, whatever, that everyone is given a fair shake and treated equally under the law. That's the goal, right? I mean, we can agree on that truth. And in addition to everyone having those due process rights, we should all have the right to seek change in the system when it doesn't accomplish those things, when it's unjust. So that's why the First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, to petition for change. That's why it's so important, and we all support that. Those are basic truths I think we all agree on. A couple other basic truths just to give us some more common ground. Even though we see each other's skin color with our human eyes, the law itself must be colorblind. That's why we call it blind justice. The laws and the enforcement thereof should not be different, whether you're white, black, brown, or any combination. I don't know a single person that disagrees with that. I realize that some will say that the laws and law enforcement are not equally applied. Some say they're unfairly applied more harshly to people with black skin. Others will say the opposite. They say that due to fear of being called a racist, the laws and their enforcement is now these days less likely to be applied to people with black skin. I'm not taking a side on that debate, all right? I'm just stating the truth that our goal is that the law would be colorblind. Hopefully we can agree on that as a starting point, and then we can talk about what we need to change to get there. Okay, last two. So I'm at number 5 now, I think. So truth number 5. Violence against innocent people and their property is wrong. Period. I don't think I need to elaborate on that one. We should all agree on that. Violence against innocent people and their property is wrong. Last one for today. But very simply, just as the Declaration puts it, the only way you get just power for government is when it comes from us, from consent of the governed. So our dream, our goal for the situation and our government and the structure of how our society works is that we, the people, are still in charge. We have all the tools we need at our disposal to change our government and the laws so that we have a better system of justice. So whatever changes need to happen, there are peaceful means to bring about that change. Now that's not as exciting. It's not as adrenaline rushing as storming the Capitol and screaming vulgar chants at people who did nothing to you, but it does allow us to target the real problem and bring about real change. Now, I hope those 6 truths are not controversial. I hope we can agree on those. That gives us a little bit of a foundation. So now let's look at why those simple truths are not actually being lived out in America today, at least according to some people, and frankly, I'm one of those people. I think those things are not being justly applied today. We are facing right now, it's almost like 2 different, it means like World War II, a European theater and the Pacific theater. We're facing 2 existential threats to our free society at the exact same time. On one hand, we have the tyrannical government control through COVID crackdowns, and that's one extreme. And then on the other hand, we have complete chaos and societal meltdown in our streets on the other. These things are happening at the exact same time, and they are existential threats. But they're actually symptoms of the underlying disease, and that disease is actually not nearly as complicated as the pundits wish to make it. I mean, people right now that are trying to have a conversation are basically saying you don't understand me because you don't have my experience. Both sides, whether you're white, black, or whatever, everybody's kind of saying the same thing. I don't understand because I don't have your experience. You don't understand. What I'm talking about, the underlying disease, we can all understand and should make perfect sense. Here's the deal. Very simply, we as a society have lost the ability to tell right from wrong, to tell good from evil. Martin Luther King Jr. said it was immoral to use violence to protest. But can we say that today? I mean, who can say what is immoral when our culture has been drinking the poison of moral relativism? Anything goes, everything's okay, it's up to you. We've been drinking that poison for 50 years. We swallowed the precursor to disaster to the point that we have said we've said this as a culture, it's wrong to judge anyone or any action. You see, that is the underlying problem of all of our societal chaos right now. The lack of moral clarity, the lack of moral absolutes, or even the idea that anything can be right or wrong. And here's where it comes from. It's that same leftist theory of moral relativism. It taught our nation that it's wrong to question anyone's sexual decisions, no matter how deviant they may be or how destructive they may be to the individual or to others. It's not your choice, it's their choice. You can't even say that it's wrong. It's wrong to prevent someone from killing their baby because it's their body and you can't possibly understand what they're going through. That's the leftist mindset that has been telling us for years that it's wrong to judge criminal behavior. I mean, that's literally what they say because we just don't understand what that person has been through. So somehow whatever they've been through justifies the criminal behavior. That's not true. That is a lie from the left that is undermining our entire culture. Look, no matter what has happened to me in my past or my present, I am not justified in killing you or burning down your business or beating you, a total stranger who had nothing to do with whatever injustice occurred in my life. Now that's true if I'm a protester or I'm a cop or whatever. If I'm a cop, no matter what bad experience I've had in the past with someone that just happens to look a little like you, that doesn't give me the right to treat you any different than any other citizen. Just because you might remind me of some previous event or person because of the way you're dressed or the color of your skin or whatever. See, that's why we demand blind justice, equal justice for all. That's a principle we can all agree on. But the reason the principle is not being applied across the board is because our real problem is we are a society that has spurned truth and moral absolutes. And a society that rejects truth and moral absolutes becomes incapable of determining justice and authority and jurisdiction. I'm going to say that again for me and for you. Listen, a society that rejects truth and moral absolutes is incapable of determining justice and authority and jurisdiction. That's why whether it's a petty tyrant governor that's telling you you aren't essential, you may not even leave your home or go to work, or it's an out-of-control mob claiming to be protesting a single instance of abuse of power, or systemic if that's your belief. Either way, we're incapable of being able to determine what is just. We've created moral equivalence where there is none. And our leaders seem paralyzed out of fear that they might be called racist. If the person doing wrong happens to be a particular skin color, you can't say anything. That's the environment that we've created. And look, I know a lot of people want to make this all about race. And they will say in response to this, I can see the posts already, that, well, you can't leave race out of it. But isn't that exactly the essence of MLK's message and the idea of blind justice, that we should be judged based on the content of our character, our actions, not the color of our skin? So at least for conversation, can I leave race out of it just for a minute, just to talk principles? Just for a moment, without regard to race, let's just talk about right and wrong, good and evil, and our lack of courage or even the intellectual honesty to determine the difference between good and evil. So I'm just going to throw out 4 quick scenarios, and I want you to think about right from wrong. Can you determine right from wrong without regard to race, just the actions of the individuals? Here's the first scenario. If you have a man handcuffed on the ground and 3 officers are sitting on him, putting your knee on his neck for 8 minutes and killing him is wrong, right? We all agree on that, regardless of the race of the officer or the person that is on the ground under arrest. If the officer has no fear for their life or anyone else's, then they are literally not just being an absolute jerk, they're being a murderer, and they should go to jail. We all agree on that. Everybody said that a million times on social media. I would add that if you're a cop standing there watching that happen, you too belong in jail. So I get it, due process for the cops and all that. I'm for that, and I will fight for that as well. But I'm just stating the principle that abuse of power in this way, once proven, and I think it's proven by the video, but they still deserve a trial. Once proven, that it's absolutely wrong, and virtually every human being in America agrees on this. So that's not anything we disagree on. We don't have to riot to get that point across. We all agree, okay? So that's scenario number one, and I think we can all tell that's wrong. Okay, scenario number two. If you barge into my house at 1 o'clock in the morning with guns drawn, I have the right to shoot you. Period. End of discussion. And if you happen to be a plainclothes officer and you did not announce yourself, I have the right to shoot you. Now, how am I supposed to know you're not a thug? Thugs come in all shapes and sizes, colors, and uniforms. So to all my Second Amendment friends out there that are saying, yes, 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 Rick, that's exactly right. Did you know that's how Breonna Taylor was killed by Louisville police? It was wrong. Plain and simple. Heads should roll for that scenario. This is the problem with no-knock warrants. Okay, I'm not saying they should never exist. There are situations where the officers need a no-knock warrant because of the situation, but maybe that's one of the changes we should be asking for in the law, is that's got to be signed off by a judge and the chief of police and whoever else before that happens. Because in this situation, plainclothes officers busting into someone's home at 1 o'clock in the morning that isn't even the subject they're looking for, just because drugs they think had been delivered to that address at some point, is a terrible, terrible situation. Breonna Taylor should never have been killed. And absolutely there was a right to shoot back at the officers in that situation. Okay, so those two scenarios, I think all of us, when we know and understand the facts, we probably all agree, wrong. Okay, now third scenario. The test is going to get tougher here. If you pull a gun on a police officer, I don't care if you're black, white, red, purple, doesn't matter. The question is, if you pull a gun on a police officer, does the police officer have the authority to shoot you? Is there anyone out there that would say no? I would hope not. Both from a law and order perspective and from a basic law of nature called self-defense. You should be shot if you pull a gun on a cop. That is not something to protest. That is not something to call unjust. I don't care if the police officer is white, black, or any shade or combination thereof. Okay, so in that scenario, hopefully the moral clarity is there and we can tell right from wrong. And we all agree a police officer is justified in shooting at someone that pulls a gun on them, broad daylight. If they know you're a cop and they pull a gun on you, you have the right to shoot back. That is different from barging into a home at 1 o'clock in the morning and the person not knowing whether or not you are a police officer. Do we have the moral clarity to see the difference in those two scenarios? And do our actions in response to those two scenarios, do we think about right and wrong and pick the right one to have a protest over? All right, last one, and here's where I'm going to probably get a lot of hate mail. If you are the size of an NFL lineman and you are punching a police officer and trying to take their gun, you should be shot. Again, race is irrelevant. But just in case you need two examples, I'll give you both. I'll give you one where it's a large white man and a black police officer, and I'll give you another one where it's a large black man and a white police officer, okay? First of all, in Chicago, 3 months ago, very large white man was shot by black police officers after he resisted arrest, and one of the officers thought he was going for the gun. Okay, you watch the video of that thing, I don't know, he didn't actually punch either of them, and you can't see him going for a gun, but he's resisting arrest. If you resist arrest, folks, bad things are going to happen. So he ends up getting shot. Now, other scenarios, 6 years ago, Michael Brown robs a store, beats the crap out of a cop, and goes for his gun, does the cop have the right to shoot him? I say yes. I would think you would too. The cop did shoot him, and that is the case that led to the Ferguson riots of 2014. That scenario creates confusion for me, right? Like, what is it that people wanted in that scenario? Did they want the officer to just let Brown beat him to a pulp, take his gun and kill him, and then do God knows what to other people, including the people he just robbed? I mean, is that what police are supposed to do? Can we just simply agree that if you try to take a police officer's gun and you get shot, well, that is probably justice, not a lack of justice? So here's where I'm going with all this. Why can't leaders of all communities have the moral clarity to tell the difference between those situations? Now, this is just my theory, but I think the reason things are so volatile right now is not because bad people have done bad things. That's the story of mankind. That's not going to change this side of heaven, unfortunately. The reason for so much chaos is the lack of moral clarity to determine which actions are good and which are evil. You see, when the people who want to divide us, that want to drive a wedge between you and me because the color of your skin might be different than mine, when they are trying so hard to destroy our communities and to destroy the American way of life, when they are lying to the public over and over again and calling things police brutality when they were actually justified responses that any sane person would have responded the same way, then don't be surprised that have created a powder keg so that when there's actual abuse, when there's an actual true abuse of power happening and it's caught on video, the keg explodes. We planted the seeds all that time. We had media morons and community leaders stirring up riots year after year without regard to right or wrong, without regard to having moral clarity as to whether or not it's a justified officer response or not, always based entirely on race and none of the relevant facts. I shouldn't say always. Most of these scenarios that have gained national attention, it was all about the race and not the relevant facts. You see, if we had, as a society, if we had had the moral clarity to speak truth in those previous situations, perhaps leaders of all of our communities would have more credibility right now to calm the current crisis and thereby keep the focus on justice for George Floyd. That's what we want, right? But we need the focus to be on that. Why is there such a divide in our nation rather than unity over an obvious wrong? A lack of moral clarity for years, for decades. Why is it so hard to condemn the violence of criminal thugs who have hijacked the protest that were intended to be peaceful? Why is that hard for people? Lack of moral clarity. It took the mayor of Minneapolis and the governor of Minnesota and other politicians days to finally distinguish between peaceful protesters and violent thugs. They just lumped everybody in the same category because of no moral clarity. And yeah, I mean, it's just as wrong to lump all the peaceful George Floyd protesters into the thug category as it is wrong to claim that all cops are bad because of the actions of the man who killed George Floyd. But if we're going to distinguish between the good and bad, we got to have moral clarity. And that's the very thing America has shunned for decades. See, I personally believe this is not a color of skin problem. This is a morality and truth problem that transcends those things. If moral absolutes do not exist, how can you say something's justified or not justified? A society that is foolish enough to deny the basic biology of male and female, foolish enough to condone the killing of innocent babies and reject the existence of God, that's a society that is unmoored from truth, justice, and morality. If there's no God, there's no Ten Commandments. If there's no laws of nature and nature's God, then how is murder wrong, whether it's a rogue cop that's doing the killing or a mob of thugs? If there's no thou shalt not steal, then how can one know if looting and stealing and destruction of property is wrong? See, if we don't teach those things, how can we expect the good result? We should expect the bad result. What we're witnessing is the logical result of decades of tearing down Western civilization, tearing down her biblical foundation of right and wrong. We have been overrun by anti-government anarchists Now, we've always had rebellions and civil unrest, but the difference is that in past history, that's always been a rogue few. That's been the antisocial, not most of society. And I think the existential threat that has brought us to this tipping point is not actual systemic racism, but it is systemic anti-Americanism. And it's in our leaders, it's in our people. The left has hijacked our institutions and spread its poison throughout our culture for 2 generations now. And I hate to say it, but thanks to the leftist infiltration of our institutions, our institutions of learning, our institutions of entertainment, journalism, politics, because of their leftist infiltration and spreading that poison for the last 50 years, we really do have 2 Americas now. I think and I hope at least half of America still believes in truth, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But I'm afraid there's a half of America now that genuinely believes in moral relativism and death and destruction when convenient for them, equality over liberty, which is socialism, and the guarantee, not pursuit, guarantee of happiness, guaranteed income, guaranteed insurance, guaranteed nanny state to take care of everyone. It's 2 different Americas. Which America will win? I know that sounds divisive, right? Some people are going to say, Rick, it's not us versus them. We're all in this together. No, in some cases, we're not. I will not have a kumbaya hug fest with an Antifa thug who wants to destroy this nation, who is quite literally setting our cities on fire. Those kinds of people do not deserve to be a part of the public conversation right now. They deserve to be in jail. And as for those who are nonviolent, but they're misguided liberals who have bought the same old deceptive lies of Marx, I will gladly debate the merits of various policies with anyone who shares the common ground truth we started with today, especially the truth that violence against the innocent is unacceptable and does not earn you a seat at the table, but it earns you a cell. And I think once we get the thugs off the streets and out of the headlines, we can start having real conversations about real change. Actually, I don't want to wait for that. I think even while our leaders are finally moving to stop the violence, you and I can start the conversation now. We can start that discussion now. In fact, I'm begging for that conversation with my white friends, my black friends, my brown friends, with all of them. And we can just be honest with each other. Can we have frank discussion? In fact, I'd like to throw this out there. I think it could be helpful. Let's have a frank discussion in a live format online. I've been talking to several of my friends that are black, brown, white in the last few days, and genuine questions have been coming up. They're tough questions. They're questions that most people want to avoid right now. They're afraid to ask because they'll be labeled a racist. If you're black and you ask certain questions right now, other black people in your community may call you a racist. If I'm white and I ask certain questions, there may be some that in my community will call me a racist. In the white community and the black community might call me a racist with other. Can we just put all that aside and say, let's have an open, frank discussion? These things need to be asked. Can we all agree that the only way I'm going to understand my black brothers and sisters better, and if you're black, the only way you're going to understand your white brothers and sisters better, is if we can have relationship? And doesn't relationship require real conversations? I mean, I know I can have assumptions about my wife and she can have assumptions about me and unrealized expectations and all those things you learn in marriage, seminars that the only way you get around all that is conversation, to actually talk those things through, to put those things on the table and have a good enough relationship that you can, and that you don't get so paranoid about offending each other that you can't even talk. I think we need that conversation. Not platitudes, not hashtags, real conversations with tough questions and transparent hearts. Isn't that where healing can actually take place? So here's what we're going to do. I've asked a few of my friends to join me live for that conversation. And we'd love for you to join us as well and ask questions of the group. We genuinely want to respect each other. We want to learn from each other and work towards an even better America. So we're going to do that in the next few days. There's going to be links and times and all that on the page wherever you're watching this video. And just to kind of give you a heads up on some of these questions so you can be thinking about it as well. Here's some of the questions that just frankly come to mind for me that I genuinely want to be able to ask and get answers and have discussions and response. Here's a few of them. First of all, why is it that blacks think you're racist if you say all lives matter? Why do whites think that joining the mantra of Black Lives Matter is somehow saying that we didn't believe all lives mattered before, including blacks? In other words, if you say Black Lives Matter, does that mean that in the past you didn't think Black Lives Matter? And if we say Black Lives Matter, what about brown lives and other minorities? Isn't the singling out of one race actually mattering? Isn't that the opposite of equality? So those are just questions, but back and forth. I think we all kind of let's talk about that. Let's also talk about this idea of white privilege in 2020 America. Is that real? I mean, do people genuinely believe that's happening? And if so, what is it that's causing them to believe that? And for those of us that don't think that's happening, why do we think that? Maybe I have a blind spot on thinking there isn't white privilege. Maybe you have a blind spot on thinking there is white privilege. Can we talk about that and maybe get a discussion that maybe gets us some answers? Is there actually systemic law enforcement racism against blacks or browns or whites, right? Let's ask those questions. I would love to get real examples, not just the data, because I can look at the data, but I want to talk to people about their actual life experiences. One of the questions that I can't help but ask is, why is it that it seems like every conversation and every action and every issue for some people is seen through the race prism? It's always about race instead of trying to get race out of the equation and just being people. Why is that, and how do we change that? Another question I've been wondering is I was listening to Rush Limbaugh and Charlemagne the God, I guess is his name, and a couple of his radio hosts. It was Rush and 3 black radio hosts, and they were having a candid conversation. I thought, this is great. This is the kind of stuff that needs to happen. It's kind of what we want to have. But one of the things that happened in the conversation was that Rush said something about America is a great nation and has a good system and all that. And one of the responses was, America doesn't work for blacks. Well, is that true? I mean, if it's true, that breaks my heart, and I want to know what to do, because I'm a pro-America guy, right? America's system is better than any other system of any government in history. I firmly believe that, and I think the data points to that. But if that's only for whites, which is what was said on the radio program, I need to see some evidence of that. If that's true, then what nation is the model, right? In what nation have blacks prospered more than in America? What nation has better constitutional rights and protections, not just for whites, but for all Americans, including blacks? I want to talk about that, and I want to find out how to make it not true then. If America doesn't work, I want to change that myself, but I want to first be given proof that that's actually for real. 2 more, and then I'll finally shut this thing off. This is turning from a constitutional minute into a constitutional hour. I'm sorry, but it is the times we're in. Do blacks in 2020 really think that whites in 2020 should pay for the sins of the fathers, or in this particular case, the great-great-great-grandfathers, or even non-ancestors, right? What if you're white and you came here from South Africa or something, or from some other country, and you didn't have anything to do with American slavery from 100 years ago? Is that a real feeling among our black brothers and sisters that we should somehow pay for the sins of our fathers? Because I've seen white people literally kneeling and asking for forgiveness of something that they did not do. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. Are we supposed to apologize for what other people did, even in other centuries, let alone in our own particular culture? Genuine question. Let's talk about it. Last one. This is the most important one, I think, to get us moving forward. What specifically is the change that people are asking for? Because I will get on board if it makes sense. The First Amendment right we are all claiming when we march and protest is the right to petition government for a redress of grievances. So what is the petition? When I protested last Monday against the COVID crackdowns, I specifically asked for the stay-at-home orders to be lifted and people allowed to go back to work, for churches to be able to gather and worship, to exercise their First Amendment. So there was a very specific policy change, okay? What is the specific policy change that the George Floyd protesters are asking for? I hear laws need to change. I hear reform needs to happen. Great. I might be with you and probably am with you. what specifically is the change and the reform. One of the ones I'm for is the no-knock warrants being limited to very specific, very limited scenarios. That would take care of the injustice that happened to Breonna Taylor. So I need to know, what are the specific changes that are being asked for in the other areas as well. All right, there you go. If that sounds like a beneficial conversation to you, then you absolutely should join us. In the meantime, I will end our constitutional hour. We're going to retitle this. Can we fix this graphic here? Patriot Academy presents today's constitutional hour, and then I'll do a constitutional day. No, listen. Let's bring it back to where we started. The real problem, at least this is my hypothesis, the real problem is a lack of moral clarity, a lack of standards of right and wrong. So let's take some inspiration as we close out from the man that spent his life fighting to end slavery in the British Empire. William Wilberforce said that God had called him to two things: to end the slave trade and to have a restoration of manners, to make being good fashionable again, a restoration of morals. Can we agree on that? Can we start there? Can we start looking for ways to walk that out, making being good fashionable again? Let's walk that out in our daily lives and our interactions with each other. I know we can do that because it's already starting right there on the streets in the middle of the riots. I've been sharing on social media several of these pictures of, in one instance, courageous black men of moral clarity who formed a human wall of protection around a police officer who had been separated from his unit. Or a video of the people that are helping the wounded who had been beaten by violent rioters. Protesters that were helping the wounded, right? But they were peaceful protesters, not violent rioters. How about the video of volunteers every morning so far? Every night when there's been looting and destruction, every morning volunteers have shown up on the streets of our cities helping to clean up the destruction. Those are all great signs. Signs of goodness being made fashionable again. Goodness is still in America, and from that we can rebuild. From that we can make being good fashionable again. I'm Rick Green, and this has been today's Constitutional Minute, or hour, as the case may be.